Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Transformation Brutal Truth series. If this is your first time joining us, I'm Ben Dickey from the Hive Mind Network and the host of the series. If you've been for previous sessions, you already know how this works, but we're going to have a good 30-minute discussion this morning, getting under the surface of why transformation fails. If you can pop the next slide down, David. We've so far over the last 4 weeks been through the scale of change facing organizations in the extinction event, trust and culture in human first, how outdated governance is slowing down digital progress in the CIO's last stand, and then last week we had a fantastic session with Indra on the shadow organization and some of those invisible forces either driving and accelerating or blocking change. And today we're going to be unpacking where value gets lost in transformation programs, how to build it back in, and what leaders can do differently to have the biggest impact. So the format is going to be very similar. A bit of housekeeping. We're really keen to have your participation and involvement in the session. I can just pop the next slide, David. So we're going to be running, as we have every week, a couple of polls to get your experience and insight shared, as well as inviting your questions. So as we're going through the material, covering some of the hard-won truths and David's experience, if you've got questions, you want a little more detail on some of the topics or a little more clarity, pop your questions in the chat on the right-hand side, and we'll save 10-15 minutes at the end of today's session for diving into a Q&A with David and I. So I'm really thrilled to have David Higgins with us this morning. David's a transformation heavyweight. He probably won't thank me for saying that, but he's run a number of transformation programs with Hive Mind clients and many other organizations over a 30-year career. He focuses on strategy execution and has worked on programs that have been funded by external investors, private equity, the UK Treasury, and internal corporate investment houses. Works across fast growth and high pace startups, as well as large scale outsourcing, transformations, mergers and acquisitions, turnarounds, and technology enabled change. Working with global brands like Ford, Unilever, the NHS, BT, as well as some of the large well-known consultancies like Accenture and McKinsey. David is a passionate value creation expert, and he's a lot of fun to work with, as we've had the pleasure many times over the years. And I'm delighted to have him with us this morning to shine a spotlight on something that's really important in transformation program success, and that's the illusion that transformation equals value. And we've seen, and David, I'm sure you've got lots of experience of this, where the programs are hitting milestones, the reporting is all green, we've delivered the system, and we celebrate the end of the program, but actually the customers haven't felt the difference. The bottom line or the top line in the business hasn't been impacted. And if we went back across the teams in 6 months and asked them what the impact of the change was, or did work feel different, we probably wouldn't hear a great story. And that's what we call the value mirage. And David, that's what we're looking to unpack with your support today.
Great, Ben. Thanks. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. And looking forward to a good conversation over the next half an hour.
Perfect. So we wanted to get this morning's session kicked off with a quick poll. Hopefully you can see that up on screen now. So in your organizations and either current and ongoing transformation efforts and or Transformation programs you've been involved in the past, which of these have you seen most often? The value case is vague and too high level or missing from the start. Failure to communicate strategy effectively, so you can't connect actions directly to outcomes. Organization capacity don't match the pace of strategic ambition. Lack of alignment with the right hand, often not knowing what the left hand is doing, or described as silo delivery, or value delivery isn't owned and outcomes aren't measured. And on the right hand side, the poll should be launched. I can see we're getting some answers and responses in the chat. 4 and 5 from Dimitar. There we go. The technology's caught up with us, and you should now be able to put your votes in the poll in place of where the chat is. We'll just give folks a 30 seconds or so, David, to
sure,
to answer that. But you should all be able to see on screen not just your own vote, but where what others' experience has been as well. So it looks like a fairly even spread, although failure to communicate strategy has got the least votes, and looks like I've encouraged somebody to press the button as it just jumped up. I think a good mix across the board that shows, from my perspective, it's very, very infrequently one particular issue present in a transformation program that slows either progress or impedes the overall value that's delivered. Highest weight going on lack of alignment or value delivery not being owned, which from my perspective is encouraging, because that's well aligned to topic you've got planned for us today, David.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Ben. Thanks. So look, I think this was introduced as why transformations fail. I'd rather talk about how we can make transformations successful. So, and look, there's many reasons and many ways organizations arrive at the transformation gateway, if you like, and it takes many forms. Often organizations are driven by external factors. Also, internal forces can also drive a transformation. And look, transformations can happen quickly, and they tend to be the ones that I've been involved with just because pace is important around PE, for example. But others have the time to evolve and learn as they go, and it's a mixed bag. So transformation is a big word. It's a big space we're going to be talking about today. McKinsey helpfully highlight that 70% of transformations fail, and so they're fraught with failure, and they're fraught with risk, and they're fraught with false starts. And often, I'm sure probably everybody on this call has been part of a transformation or a strategy execution program which has stuttered and failed and had to be turned around. So today, I'd like to share some of my hard-won truths that I've learned along the way, and highlight some potential bear traps that I hope, when you're involved in or leading transformation programs, it'll help you get more into the 30% and avoid the 70%.
Perfect.
But central to all transformation programs, I think this is the key. This is the bit that often gets lost in the global change programs. When we start getting involved in technology and the complexity of the doing, it's the pursuit of value is the whole purpose that a transformation exists. And the journey towards the end it is all about creating that value. And that value has to move the needle, has to register, has to be understood, has to be felt, not just in EBITDA terms, but it has to do something. It has to create the return the business case or the value, and we'll talk about it in a minute, about the value creation plan, is there and is defined. And for our conversation today, look, we're going to join the transformation journey towards the end of the strategy development stage. And as you see on the slide, often an organization comes to this juncture and for whatever reasons, they've developed a strategy, they've done some causal diagnostics, they've developed their strategy, and hopefully the organization has created a value creation plan. Now, in the value creation plan, it's a key enabler. Strategy is great, but unless it drives down to understanding how that value is projected to be created, then there's a gap already. And often I've seen that in organizations where we've stepped in, they've got a transformation program, and you've looked and you've challenged, and the definition of the creation of value just isn't there. It's too vague. And we'll come into more of that as we go through this discussion. But in simple terms, a good value creation plan will identify all the activities that will increase the value of a product or a service that the organization provides, and it will define how the business can differentiate themselves from a competitor and attract and retain their customers. And my job now, and what the discussion as we're going to talk through this morning, is how do we create a bridge that crosses the chasm from strategy to execution, and how we focus the whole of the organization on value creation, not just transformation or plans or work for its own sake, but actually helping the organization understand how every person in that organization can deliver day to day and create that value. Sounds simple, eh? Okay. So before we jump in, I just wanted to touch upon what we mean by value, and this might be bread and butter for some guys on the call, but I just wanted to bring this up and unpack it a little bit. On the slides, you'll see a couple of graphics that just talk about value levers, and it's a term that's discussed in strategy. It's a term that's discussed in strategy execution a lot. But effectively, you'll see that in the more simple, in the three levers, it's sell more, manage your risk better, and your cost to serve is less, your cost to operate is less. And by pulling on those value levers, you create value in the organization. But as soon as we start to understand that, and as soon as we start to look into how strategy is formed and how those outcomes are created, straight away, it dawns on you that an organization has to deliver horizontally. It can no longer work in the departments that it has done previously. The constructs that serve them well to get to this point in BAU can now become obstacles to value creation. So we soon start to look at ways of rewiring the organization to deliver its strategy, moving away from hierarchy, developing highly collaborative, outcome-focused expert teams with a single focus on value, networks of people, collaborations, looking to the new disciplines that digital has really brought us forward around product management, helps. It moves us away from the sort of, project management and all that good delivery stuff as a foundation is still key, but actually flattening those organizational structures, having the experts in the room, regardless of where they sit in the org chart, and focusing and measuring the outcome 100% on the value that's delivered, not just the milestones that are in the plan. The milestones in the plan, the deliverables in the plan, they're all preceding events often. And it's important that they're on track. But without actually seeing and identifying what that value that project plan may create and understanding how it impacts the customer in the end, you're not going to move the dial. And often transformation leadership is simplifying that spaghetti and refocusing the operation and culture to deliver against that value. I often think strategy execution is a bit like an onion. If you dissect it, and we'll see this as we go through these slides today, is there's layers and layers and layers of transformation. So each time it might look like one big strategy plan, but as you dissect it, you actually start seeing culture shifts all the way through all the activities and all the changes of focus in the organization.
So David, when you're working with exec teams and they're clear on value, you've brought the exact slide up I was hoping you would. What if the exec teams are clear on value, what are some of the blockers for organizations achieving that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, as you sit in boardrooms and you look at how the strategy is disseminated across the various actors and responsible parties. Um, People take what they want out of these things. It's human nature. But often, when you then start to challenge, you see executives being ambiguous, or even have competing definitions of what value is, and that's understandable. Um, but driving around clear accountability, and you'll see some of the value blockers that I often see in organisations on the slide. Um, but driving, if I could say anything out of these, driving for accountability is probably the most important. And then linking strategy back to the activity in day to day. You often see short term, you often see the short term focus of in year targets competing with the long term objectives of strategy. These things have to be confronted, and often, Ben, in the senior leadership type discussions, these are hard conversations, right? These are hard conversations to be able to say stuff that's going to reward you in the in year is a conflict with strategy. But unless those things are um, uh, unlinked and made clear and then resolved, you're just going to run into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock because you've got an alignment in the team.
Mm-hmm.
I think also when you start looking around those value blockers, and we're going to touch upon them in the sort of brutal truths in a minute, but if you've not baselined from where you are to start with, you don't know how much you've improved. You don't know how much value created. But there's often a real need and a real pressure to move forward at pace. And often the transformation team, the transformation leadership is sometimes you have to go slow to speed up. And that's something that will come through the slides in a second. So look, they're there, the value blockers. I'm not going to pull out, we're not got time today on the call to pull out and deep dive in each one. But they come through these brutal truths. And I think when you look at this back and you look at the slides later, they'll start to resonate.
Perfect.
So against those blockers, I guess I've tried to bring out 4 areas of my personal experience. And look, some of this has been experienced through success, but actually most has been learned through failure, right? So you get stuff wrong, you course correct, you get back on the horse, and you do it again. And that's the story of transformation as well. Is it's course correct, course correct, course correct. All the time. But hopefully, with some of these hard-won truths, it gives you some insight so that you can avoid some of those challenges in future, and also help your team. So if I look at that, and I look at these 4, laser focus on value creation. It's so easy to get sucked into the day-to-day, the complexity of managing projects and the complexity of managing teams. But you've got to be passionate and committed to zero ambiguity on the value on anything that isn't going to deliver value. Question it hard, stop it, right? And question yourself: is the customer going to notice? Is the colleague going to notice? All this effort, all these meetings, all this discussion, all these documents, all these plans, is it really going to realize an outcome that your customer or colleague is going to notice? If it doesn't, challenge. And do the hard work of defining, agreeing, assigning outcomes and enabling accountable leadership. And it is hard, right? You have to keep revisiting this stuff, reshaping it, and trying to get an organization that is struggling to deliver value in the beginning, hence the need for a transformation, to then reorientate itself to pure and fully focused value creation. It's chiseling granite sometimes, and you've got to keep back at it, chipping off the block as you go. Something that has come through strongly whenever we look at strategy execution across organisations is often the organisation just doesn't have the budget, right? Doesn't have the capacity to fully deliver on the ambition. And sometimes that constraint is actually helpful. Sometimes it's debilitating. But the way through it is to prioritize, kill to eat, look at everything around you that's in that arena of change. And if it's not doing what point 1 is, if it's not focused on value creation, if you can't touch it and feel it, kill it, and then provide that spare capacity, and the spare capacity that those projects will give you to create the capacity in the organization so you can focus on value, but also look at the skills and create the skills and capability to deliver at pace. Often, and we'll touch upon it, I think, in one of the final slides, is that we assume an organization has the capability and capacity to deliver the strategy. Often it doesn't. You have to be clear on that and correct it. Avoid heroics and hierarchy. So one of the things that strategy does, and I've seen it myself, I've seen it in people around me, is you create a vision. You create a vision of the future which is compelling, and you've got to get there quick. But heroics have no place. What does have a place is compassion for the people around you. High stakes change can really burn people. People have to re-engineer their own identity as they go through a strategic change. And you've got to remember it's a marathon, not a sprint. So eating the elephant in small chunks, all those good sort of pieces of advice that you receive through your career, absolutely, when you come to strategy, if you try and bite it all off at one chunk, there'll be dead bodies all around you. So, avoid the heroics, embrace collaboration. And more than anything, experience in leadership around leading your transformation programs and your strategy execution. It can't be a first rodeo. If it is, and sometimes organizations seek, they put a leader in place that has maybe the political and the political kudos and the network kudos in the organization to enable the change. Good, but make sure they've got some help alongside them, because this is a road that people like myself has traveled a lot, and experience really helps. But what I would say, and there's all these, you'll see, I'll put a warning on every point around these sort of leadership truths and these hard-won truths, is every time you step forward around focusing on value creation, being more prioritized, changing the way people work, you're affecting one of those onion rings of culture shift.
Mm-hmm.
So I just flash up some of the reasons around that leadership, especially. And you can see on there, and these are independent reviews from McKinsey and BCG that start to draw conclusions over the last 10 years, I guess, about the impact of dedicated transformational leadership. Often transformation is done on the side of the desk. It can't be. Yeah. It's not at the senior leadership table. The shift for now, the CTRO, to be able to focus day in, day out on the pursuit of value, you can now see in the research about how much that impacts on the outcome of the overall program. Without it, execs have got limited bandwidth. They've got the day jobs to do. Operations just consume. And then the weak governance, or the governance that's more aligned to operating and running the business, is not focused enough to drive the value out of a transformation. And that results in poor review. It results in a poor understanding of value and what value is being created. And it also doesn't enable senior leadership team to course correct as they see problems arising.
So David, you've talked about the importance of that dedicated transformation leader. How does that affect leadership alignment?
Good question. Sometimes it feels like a magpie in the nest, if I'm honest, Ben. But but you've got to move through that at the start of a journey through transformation, because what you're looking to do is you're looking to get the whole executive alignment focused on cross-functional value outcomes, and done well, it starts to create stronger partnerships across the exec, and often you see across senior leadership teams siloed behaviour of, well, I'm okay, I've made my numbers, he's not made his numbers, so I'm okay. Actually, you start delivering strategy horizontally across an organization. You start to knit that together. You start to get more collaborative working, and you start to get a shared accountability. And people have to help each other to deliver their outcomes. Because hierarchy just doesn't work, right? When you're starting to deliver this.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. So when we talk about alignment, And we start to look at some of, again, hard-won truths, is confront reality with urgency. So change may not be good for everyone, right? And it certainly often isn't. And not everybody will agree with strategy. And actually, Ben, going back to your question, I've sat around senior leadership boards and I've seen people nod, and I know they don't support the full strategy. They'll take what they need from it and they'll move it on. But if you let that fester and you don't identify those conflicts and mitigate them at speed, then all they'll do is they'll derail your strategy execution, they'll derail the organization's strategy execution and value creation. And that's probably one of the key drivers and one of the key risks is that getting that buy-in and that alignment straight away is a key enabler. Easier said than done because people's careers, people's lives, people's previous success, people's identities at stake when you're having these conversations. And one of the key enablers to help you through that process is building that bridge from strategy into action. So taking that paper document, taking that PowerPoint, taking that report, but actually moving it into something real. And more, and we'll talk about in some of the takeaways, is there's some great digital platforms out there now where you can digitize your strategy. You can use that data and you can use that technology to make it a daily habit. So we should be looking at strategy delivery in the same way as we're looking at production metrics or operational metrics, creating that visibility so that the organization knows instinctively whether they're delivering it or not. And avoiding the needless theatre and bureaucracy that often comes with this stuff of, last minute reporting, etc. Get it in day to day, make it visible. And I touched upon it earlier, absolutely key is making sure people are inspired and aligned to the overall vision and the clear vision. There's some great tools out there to help you, some great reference guides, Simon Sinek, Your Whys, developing your North Star, the whole burning platform theory. Whatever you use, whatever's appropriate for the environment, that unified of purpose needs to be greater than the sum of its parts. And if people understand where you're heading, they'll move there themselves. You don't need to push them. And if you've got it right, they'll be running towards the vision rather than being pushed.
And you talked about, sorry, David, you talked about metrics earlier. How do leaders know if they're measuring the right things?
They know because that measure will return. Both is connected to the value lever that they're trying to leverage. So there needs to be a straight line between that metric and the outcome. It's more whether that outcome and that measure and that metric is actually understandable from anybody outside the organization. So a lot of the times you end up with internal metrics, which organizations will use to support their own existence. But does the customer care? Does the colleague care? Does the stakeholders, does the board care as far as investment return? If they don't, it's the wrong measurement. And that's part of the challenge of moving through that measurement process.
Yeah. Okay.
So just finish this. Sorry, Ben.
No. Go ahead.
So, and I guess I could just quickly, and we've got we're up against time. So, when we talk about cutting through complexity, I would also look at anybody who looks at a plan and it's 12 months long, 18 months long, 24 months, 36 months long, and you can't see the value outcome. Challenge that. Cut through that nonsense really, and seek short, sharp sprints. Agile is not just for IT. Create a drumbeat of value that comes out of your transformation program that gives you the visibility to understand where you're heading. Yeah. And again, more culture shifts as you go through, more layers of onion. This is all changing the behaviors of people and the way they work. So then back to your question about outcomes, right? So, if I pick a few of these, the old adage of what gets measured gets done. Even if you're not sure where you are at the beginning of the end metric, having a metric in itself will help propel you to that, and you can course correct as you go. But the value of the current baseline and how you define that goal before you start, just the intent of making and challenging the team to look outside the environment, back or outside the organisation, back into the program, will start to drive more and more value focus as you go. But one thing I would say on this slide, which is important, and as you deliver these projects, is execute relentlessly on value. Just be passionate about it. Question everything in the organisation of where it's heading. But when you get there, celebrate it. And what I mean is not just financial. It's not just EBITDA type, which tends to be a lag measure anyway. But demonstrate progress on customers and on colleagues and how it impacts brand and shareholders. Mm-hmm. They're really key and helps keep momentum as you move forward. And then the last one is around belief and trust. So, look, as you walk through the organisation, as you walk through these programs, and you look at what really makes the difference. And I know, Ben, in the Brutal Truth sessions up to date, you've often talked and deeply dived into a lot of the sort of engagement and culture aspects of change. But from a leadership perspective and for transformation leadership perspective, I just wanted to leave really on these ideas that strategy execution is more. It's not just locked in the boardroom, right? It's everybody's job. And if you built that bridge from strategy to execution well, everybody feels part of it. Everybody plays their part. Everybody creates that momentum. And focus on strategic alignment over delivery alone. Right? Just because you've delivered a project on time, great, fantastic. But it might not move the needle. It might not create value. You could have spent all that time delivering that product and that project, and actually you didn't question hard enough on the way through. So yes, you've delivered on time, and yes, you've delivered to budget. But actually, has it delivered the strategic outcome that is created? And if it hasn't, then it's not a success in my eyes. An operation value creation center stage in any strategy execution. Operational value moves the needle. If you want to know how to move the needle, where to move the needle, look at the operations, get into the meat of the business about how it engages the customers, how you can reduce the cost to serve with improved processes, how you can reduce risk and improve sales eventually. But more than anything, culture and empathy. So as you go through this, and every time, and at the bottom of every slide, you'll see a culture shift for warning. Every time you step forward in a transformation program and a strategy execution, you're changing culture. But those metrics of understanding how you're overcoming resistance are a true, real performance metric in an organization, because you're changing the way people work, you're changing hearts and minds.
And I think when we talked in the run up to the session, David, you talked about introducing some of these new ways of working, some of those the sort of, I guess, the radical transparency that's required to be customer outcome and value focused is a transformation within a transformation program, often in your experience. But this was the message that you've got on screen that I was most excited to get to. Some of the and I love the term bear traps. So some of the gotchas, the potholes, or the things that you've learned to be able to share with our audience today, for them to watch out for as they're navigating transformation today and in the future.
Sure, thanks, Ben. Yeah, definitely. And look, there's a lot to cover through here, but if I look at these bear traps, and these are real ones that you can walk in, I've walked into, right? So you see transformation, and it can't be at the side of the desk. It can't be the side of a leader's desk. If it is, it's at best continuous improvement, and actually requires a completely different approach. It requires you to have improvement cycles rather than transformative vision, and it's more iterative. So think about that and make sure that leaders got the focus to deliver that. And if they haven't, then seek ways of correcting it. But don't assume, and I mentioned this earlier, one of the biggest bear traps is that the ambition and the confidence of the leadership team doesn't understand the capacity and capability of the organization to match that ambition. So, my advice is be rigorous with your readiness assessment, your change diagnostics, understand where the true weaknesses are in your team, understand where the gaps are, and correct that, right? Fill the team quickly, build that team as your first role, your first focus of getting that transformation program up and running.
Mm-hmm.
Cynicism kills momentum, absolutely, right? So yes, a healthy bit of challenge, a healthy bit of cynicism, I guess, is good. And wear your black hat, do your de bono thinking, great, fantastic. But the thing that delivers strategy, the thing that delivers value, is trust and belief from the people that are in the program, people that are in the organization, people that are doing it day to day, and make sure you have the right people on the bus, even if they're in the wrong seat. But you'll know if you've got the right people on the bus, and if you haven't, don't be afraid to act. Strategy execution is all about pace, and it's all about people. If you've got the wrong people, you will never get. The fourth one is value can't be delivered in silos. We talked about it earlier when we looked at the value levers, but collaboration over heroics, working horizontally across the organization. Actually, you know what? Some of the most insightful innovations that I've seen is when we've got people together that wouldn't register on the leadership sort of radar, but have pulled them in from customer facing, operational facing activities, and we've questioned them of how to create more value in that particular area. And it's been amazing when you see how those teams come together once they're freed of hierarchy, once they're free to actually focus on delivering that outcome. Normally, it's the bugbears that have been in the organization for years, and the comments of, I've been telling people this for years and they've never listened, come through those kind of conversations. And I guess, so I'm conscious of time, yeah. So what I would say is, and I've said it before, if there's a plan and you see a plan and it's 12 months, 18 months, 2 years before you get the value, rip it up, challenge it, look for delivery, look for short, sharp delivery outcomes, and be, and absolutely be focused on that. And then the last one is, look, be aware that if you put you will need to, and you have to put an outcome-based performance management structure into an organization. You will have to measure. If you don't, you'll fail. You'll have to make accountability. If you don't, you'll fail. But just remember, that's a transformation often for itself, into an organization. A clear outcome-based performance management structure can do a lot of good, but can also be a challenge, and you have to be ready for that challenge when you start to roll that out across your strategy execution program. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for that, David. I think we've got hopefully a couple of minutes left just to do the final poll, and then we've had some questions going in the chat throughout. But if you've got any final questions you'd like to ask before we close down, if you need to leave bang on 1:15, then that's absolutely fine. But we can stay for a couple of minutes to answer questions as well. So the poll: how confident are you that your current transformation efforts are delivering real measurable value? And we've got very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, we're focused on delivery, not outcomes yet, or I'm not close enough to know. And we'll give another 30 seconds or so as the answers start to come in. So far, we've got a reasonable spread with a slight lean into somewhat confident. So values being defined, but we're not tracking it so well. would you say that was fairly common in your experience, David? Some, a small number of highly confident and a small number of not really close or not so sure or not focusing on outcomes. How does that?
Yeah, and I think it would depend on pockets of the organisation as well. Typically, I would imagine most people on this call are part of or connected to or in a transformation, and possibly just for the nature of the call in a leadership role. I challenge whether if you went into, a good test always is if you walk through an organisation and go in the warehouse or go on the call centre or go in the shop floor, and just ask some questions and see how connected people are to strategy, and see how the actual colleagues in the organisation understand who is accountable for an outcome. I think that picture changes, and that's the honest picture, and that's how I would assess it, as I would look into another.
Okay, thanks for that. So just looking through the chat, comment stroke question from Mike, some great points. Thanks for sharing, David. Will we get a copy of the slides? You'll be automatically emailed the recording when we close the session down, Mike. I don't know for sure that the slides are downloadable, but we can make sure we get a copy sent across to you and anybody else who'd like to get a copy. Just looking for other questions. Milan asked, one issue I'm looking to find a remedy for, many concepts of value being tossed around. Is value in value stream the same as value in value proposition, or what's written in brand values? If not, how do we align those concepts? Probably quite a complex conversation or question to dive into at the end of the session, David. But do you have a view on the definition of value that you see execs most often aligned to?
EBITDA, right? So and then it starts that at the top of the tree, and then starts, you start to then work through a kind of hierarchical conversation of what's going to drive the most EBITDA outcome. I think I have a kind of as from an execution lens. Mm-hmm. I'm less into my focus tends to be on constructing the value that's defined and in front of us through activity. I think the strategy guys that are further up the life cycle will need to work across both value propositions and brand values. I also saw further down in the comments about social value, and I think as investors get more savvy, and the whole sort of environmental and social value agenda starts to get stronger and it starts affecting share price and company valuations, I think that's the the wider and the more encompassing view of EBITDA, and EBITDA is an oversimplification, but it's how much is my company worth, right? And what can we invest in to make the company more valuable, right? So and I think all those things have a place.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that, David, and thanks for spending the time with us this morning, talking through that really interesting topic and sharing your experience. And as you graciously said at the start of the call, lessons learned from failures most often, and then embedded in future success. So we've had loads of great comments throughout the session this morning, some great questions and conversations that we'll try and pick up after the session. But thank you for joining us this morning and walking through that topic. We have our 6th and final session, same time next week, 11:30 Friday, where I'll be joined by Catherine Hayes to go into a little bit around sustainability and really deep dive into the change resilience crisis and how we can help organizations build change resilient capabilities. But yeah, thanks for your time this morning, David, and I wish you all a very pleasant Friday afternoon and a lovely weekend.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone.